Hey guys, it's Scott with Scotty B Cards. In this video today, we're going to be talking about the dangers of prospecting as well when to buy and sell certain prospects. Before we jump in, I'm going to be focusing on the real stuff, like you can lose some serious money in prospecting. I am not saying all prospecting is bad and you shouldn't do it. Watch the whole video because I'll explain the good, the bad, and the ugly about the entire process. But before we start, if you are a sports card, trading card, baseball card fan, then this is the channel for you. We post 2 to 3 times each and every week exclusively about this content, so make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any of those videos. So, the dangers of prospecting. The very first thing I want to point out are the pros and cons of prospecting. Prospecting is buying a player when they're still a minor leaguer or a prospect. This practice usually leads to the biggest losses and the biggest returns. It's the most risky form of sports card investing in my personal opinion. So the pro is if you go to a Bowman Chrome autograph, for example, those first Bowman cards, those are going to be the go-to investment card for any player. I'm going to focus heavily on Bowman Chrome first and Bowman Chrome first autographs in this video, but this applies to everything, Heritage minor leagues and everything, but mainly Bowman Chrome is what I'm focusing on. The Bowman Chrome print runs are very limited. So the very first Bowman Chrome autograph, if a player becomes a Hall of Famer, it's going to be the go-to card. People are going to want that card specifically. Look at Mike Trout. You can't get a BGS 9510 Bowman Chrome autograph for less than $30,000 at this point. So it's pretty crazy. But that's the one thing is they're very limited, pretty small supply. And it really is a piece of a player's performance, meaning it's kind of like a stock in the player. Every single card that you own of a player is that way, but this is the premium stock of that person. This is the closest you can get to having a piece of stock in that company or that person's play. The cons, there's quite a few. Right now, this is more of a new thing. There's a very high cost of entry, even for a prospect who has never even played a minor league game. Like Robert Powson, for example, he hadn't even played up until this year, and his costs were really high just because he has a lot of good reports from scouts and whatever else. So right now, really high cost of entry, even for guys who haven't proven anything yet. There's a huge potential for loss. There's the opportunity for you to lose a lot of money prospecting, and a lot of times you don't have the same connection to this type of player as someone you PC, so those losses can hurt a little bit more. As well, the reality is a majority of these Bowman Chrome autographs will be worthless. Only 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, if the player is not an all-time great or Hall of Famer, the card's gonna be worth $5 to $10. It's just kind of what it is. So it's a very risky practice, but it can lead to the biggest gains in the hobby, essentially. So let's just look at prospecting themselves. Here's 3 prospects I really like, and one of these players may become a great player, and the other 2 may fizzle out, or they all may become Hall of Famers, and none of them even do anything. We never know. That's what's crazy. But the first thing I want to say is before 2021, before they restructured the minor leagues, there were about 240 minor leaguers per team, which is about 7,200 minor leaguers in baseball any given year. Roughly 10% of minor league players will make it to the big leagues, so not a huge percentage. So even if you're prospecting certain players, some of them might not make the big leagues. Look at Mark Appel, I believe is his name, the first overall pick for the Astros. He never made it, and then he retired, and now he's back with the Phillies organization on a comeback, but he's still in the minor leagues. And out of those 10% of minor leaguers that make it to the big leagues, only 1.5 to 2% of those players will make the Baseball Hall of Fame. So for the long term, prospecting is very risky. And so if that's the correct math, then there are about 11 players in the minors out of that 7,200 that will be Hall of Famers in the future. So not a good portion whatsoever. So I just want to make sure we have it in perspective. Prospecting is not a game of buy and hold. It can be for people like Mike Trout. It can be a game of buy and hold, but it's also a game of buying and timing, making sure you have the right opportunity. Oh, look, it's peaking a little bit. I feel comfortable at this point and sell there. And then if it drops a little bit, buying, get back into it, that type of thing. But if we look at Mike Trout, here are some crazy numbers. When Mike Trout first had his Bowman Chrome autograph, he wasn't a big prospect. He was the 26th overall pick. He was this Angels' second pick behind Randall Grichuk, and I think a majority of the teams passed on him. The point is, though, that back in 2009, when this product came out, these are the very first cards that hit eBay on auction format for Mike Trout. This is through PWCC Marketplace, and this is the auction only because it's the only way of knowing the actual realized prices. You could have gotten the very first one, a refractor out of $500 for $21. You could have got a base autograph for $18, and if you go up here, you could have gotten an X-Factor out of $225 for $24. We know now what happened 12 years later. Right now, an X-Factor, it could have been this exact same one, this one right here, just sold for $55,000 on auction. So that is the golden, this is why people prospect. They want to make sure they can hit it big, because if you want to get a card of a player, this is the right one to get. But the chances of getting a Hall of Fame type player and or superstar is really difficult. We can look at someone like Delmon Young. Delmon Young was the top prospect in 2006. He was the guy everyone believed in. He's like the Wander Franco of 2006. And you can see his prices reflected that. These prices were really high for back in 2006 because the market for Bowman Chrome autographs wasn't as big as it is now. Now it's huge. It's gotten even bigger. But right here, $305 for a BGS 9.5. This is a refractor. Let's see if we can find a base. Here's a BGS 9 base card for $100. Here's an X Factor for $230. You get the point. If you wanted a Delmon Young Bowman Chrome autograph, you're paying at least $100 to $300. Now, these are the most recent sales on April 3rd, 2021. This exact card sold for $499 on auction. So there's a very big fall from grace if you don't have the Mike Trout. And for every Mike Trout and Mookie Betts and any player that's super successful, there are going to be 100 Delmon Youngs. And Delmon Young was a decent player. That's the thing I want to emphasize as well, is that even good players' Bowman Chrome autographs aren't always going to be worth a fortune. Here's another crazy example. These are two cards. I should have gotten the pop reports up, but I can almost guarantee there are many, many more Wander Franco cards in better condition and graded by BGS as a 9.5/10. But I'm guessing there's more. But right now, Wander Franco sold for $1,900, his Bowman Chrome autograph, while Clayton Kershaw, the last one, that's actually for sale right now, its asking price is $17.99 or best offer. So you might be able to even get it less than the $17.99. It's crazy to me that this is a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't think he'll be unanimous, but he'll be pretty close just because he's been so good. Now he has a ring MVP, 3 Cy Youngs. You get the idea. He is kind of like our Sandy Koufax. You can get his Bowman Chrome, same grades, same like weak subgrades, min gems. The point is, people are paying crazy prices for players that haven't ever made the big leagues, more so now than ever. And while that's dangerous, it's paying off. If you look at people like Ronald Acuna Jr., Juan Soto, and Fernando Tatis Jr., their BGS 9.5/10 Bowman Chrome autographs themselves are going for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. A PSA 10 is going for around 10 grand of Juan Soto, at least it was. And so the point is, this price isn't too absurd. If Franco can come out and play well, that price will probably go up. But the thing I want you to think about is when he's in the end of his career and he's not the hot prospect anymore, he's going to be around here or lower. So it's really hard for the long term to make that money, and that's why timing is so important. The next thing I want to talk about is just, prospecting in general. So here's the number 1 and number 2 prospects, each of the last since 1990, so 31 years, I believe. Here are all the prospects. And you can see there are some awesome players on here. You have Wander Franco, we don't know yet, but you have Guerrero Jr., Tatis Jr., Acuna, Ohtani. Those have been some pretty successful players. You could argue Luis Robert's been successful, but he's hurt and he has high ceiling, but he also has a pretty low floor just because he might not hit that great. But overall, you have, players like Chris Bryant, Byron Buxton, who are really good, but their cards are never going to be worth that much. Chris Bryant still can make the Hall of Fame. I think it's a little bit too late for Buxton because of his injury history. Bryant's a pretty hard shot. Corey Seager's been fine. Benintendi got traded from the Red Sox to the Royals. Moncada's okay too. He's good, but he's not going to be like a Mike Trout type player. But then you have Jurickson Profar, not a great success. Dylan Bundy, not a great success. Bryce Harper's been good. Matt Moore has been okay. Even if you look at like Jay Bruce or Matt Wieters from 2008 and 2009, like they're good MLB players, but they're not going to be the top prospects. And if this was the case, like let's say Matt Wieters, Jay Bruce were prospects in the minor leagues right now, they're the number 1, number 2 prospects, people would be paying a fortune for their cards, and we can see how their careers ended up not that well. You can even see Delmon Young up here at the top. He was number 1 prospect 2006. There are players that have been great though. You have Bryce Harper's been great. I think he's on a Hall of Fame track. You have Mike Trout. Evan Longoria is close to the Hall of Fame. I don't know if he'll get there. He needs to stay healthy, but he's actually on the IL now, having a great year with the Giants, which is unfortunate. Felix Hernandez was a good pitcher, won't make the Hall of Fame most likely. If he does, it may be from like the Veterans Committee. Justin Upton's been a 35 WAR player throughout his career. But you get the idea. Paul Konerko was good, but I think he ended up with like 30 WAR as well. Andrew Jones was good. He's on the Hall of Fame ballot, so he might make it. But you have A-Rod, Chipper Jones, and then you have some very fun names for the older collectors, Brian Taylor and Todd Van Poppel. So the point is, they're not always accurate, these number 1, number 2 rankings. That's what I want to point out. Is a lot of these players, even though they're the best of the best in scouts' eyes, the public's eyes, does not always translate. So I just want to talk about players, age, and the card values decrease. This is across the board, even with good players. Here's like the worst case scenario for prospecting right here. I saw this on Blowout Forums. This player, this is Matt Harvey. He had a lot of hype when he was at the top of his game before his injuries and his falling out with the Mets organization. Sorry, Mets fans probably know all about it, more so than anybody else. But this card sold on June 8th in 2015 for $6,200. 4 years later, April 7th, 2019, the exact same card. You can tell it's the exact same because of the numbering. 01 and 25, 01 and 25, sold for $76. There is a lot of downside for these high-end products. And right now we're seeing record sales across the board, and people are gonna have to know they're gonna lose money. And that's why I'm making this video. I just want the newer people in the hobby to realize, yes, prospecting is awesome because you have huge earning potential. There's also huge potentials for loss. We have not seen that a ton yet, but I just want to remind you, as a player ages, their love from a fan base, their love from the meta's perspective will die down. Here's a Justin Upton Bowman Chrome autograph, sells for 20 bucks. That was a really, really hot card back in the late 2000s. Felix Hernandez, who I said arguably could be a Hall of Famer, I don't think he will, 50 bucks. David Wright, who was a Mets great, he had a lot of injuries, 85 bucks. Evan Longoria, who was a borderline Hall of Famer, 50 bucks. Joe Mauer, who I think is a Hall of Famer. If you don't think so, go compare his stats to Buster Posey. He has better numbers, but people think Buster Posey's a Hall of Famer. So go check out his numbers if you don't believe me there. But 150 bucks for a Hall of Fame Bowman Chrome autograph. Even a current great Justin Verlander who's still playing is 275 bucks. So there's not a lot of long-term growth in some of these cards, but I just wanted to point that out. After that, the main thing about prospecting, now that I've painted a pretty bleak picture, there's a ton of money to be made in prospecting. You just have to know when to sell. You know when to sell and know who to buy. So the first thing I want to say is there are key times to sell and maximizing your profits with prospects. The first one is when the player is just drafted and there's hype. Let's say you're opening a box of Bowman Chrome. It's a top 5 pick. You get an autograph or a really nice card. Get that card graded, sell it, be one of the first to the market. You'll make a good chunk of change, and most likely that card may go up slightly, but in the long run, you made a killing. On top of that is when the player is playing really well in the high leagues and people are speculating a debut. That's also a good time to sell because that's when cards start ramping up because people think this guy is going to be the real deal in the big leagues. When they are called up is also a great time to sell. And then also when they show flashes of skill in pro baseball, that is the very best time to actually capitalize on profits, but it's also the most risky because if the player doesn't play well, then your investment tanks. I have an example right here of Jared Kelenic. We can see that exactly. This was last year. There was no minor league season, then it was the off season. So we're into January. The hype train started because Kelenic was going to be coming to the big league camp. Once big league camp came in spring training, he played very good. He played really well. People were speculating he would be on the Mariners opening day roster. There was a legitimate argument for him to be on the opening day roster. But then he got sent to the minors and his numbers dropped a little bit. They went back to about 200 to 250 from 300 high. And then it started to, right here, I think was when they announced some tweets on the 9th and the 10th that he's getting called back up. And that shot up. And this was the peak, about 320 bucks. And that was the peak. And then he didn't play great. And then he hit that home run. Right there was the home run. And then he played terrible. And then he got sent to the minor leagues. And it's just going down. Now it's at the same place it was back in February, which still is up from here. But the point is there are peaks and valleys with prospecting. And knowing when to actually time those is really important. It's going to be really hard to hit the top of the market every time. I'm going to say that right now. Maybe people who are holding Kelenic right now who sold at $300 are going to be really sorry if Kelenic comes back and plays well and let's go to $800. But right now they're looking pretty good if he continues the same trajectory. He's too good of a player to do so, but the point is make sure you identify where is a good return for you and once it hits that number, take it. That's my only advice with prospect, and that's how you can make the most money and then reinvest that in another prospect. I would be looking at I look at Wander Franco. I really like Wander Franco. I don't know what his Bowman Chrome PSA 10 is going for, but if it's less than 300 bucks, I would buy it because the moment he debuts, it will be higher than Kelenic. Julio Rodriguez is awesome. Ronnie Mauricio is awesome. He's a player I really enjoy. There's other players for the Giants have some great prospects, but the point is, look at these charts from previous people who've debuted and see what happened and try to time that as well. And I just want to say prospecting isn't for everybody. Me, myself, I get too attached for cards and I hold them too long. Sometimes I miss peaks, and because of that, I don't prospect. I don't speculate, even though I think I could be okay at it. I just really focus on my guys I enjoy, like Mike Trout, Mookie Betts, Francisco Lindor, and so forth. But let's talk about a couple final things. Prospecting requires paying attention. You need to make sure you're paying attention to market trends as well as paying attention to your specific player and how he is performing. It also requires patience because you may have to wait a year to 3 years before your player gets to the big leagues or before he starts playing really, really well. And if you're able to hold a card that's like a red refractor of 5, you're going to really pay some dividends if it's a good player. And also prospecting requires more research than an average MLB player. You got to dig into everything from like how hard they hit the ball, how much like what their barrel percentage is. All these numbers weren't available before, but they are now. You don't have like the WAR figures, but you have other in-depth advanced metrics. Look at on base percentage, how much they strike out. All of these things can help you identify a player with a good eye or a pitcher who has good stuff. Watch their videos, identify who passes that eye test as well as the numbers, because that also is important. But also, I have been bashing prospecting as a dangerous thing, but it is a lot of fun. I've done it in the past. It is a lot of fun. It's not my personal favorite thing. I like the hunt of a specific card. That's rare, but prospecting is some of the most fun you can have in the hobby by far. On top of that, a lot of money can be made in prospecting. Probably the very most amount of money you can make in the hobby is in this method. So just make sure you're aware of that. Make sure that you're taking on the risk that you can afford. And I'd recommend anybody who's new trying to get into it, make sure that you're doing your research before you buy. You know, I say Gary Vee always says do 50 hours of research. I'm not a huge Gary Vee guy, but I don't think that's a bad bit of advice. So anyways, guys, that is my video on prospects. Make sure that you are not spending more money on a player who's ever debuted than a all-time great Hall of Famer. It's just crazy to me, but if that's your thing and you can make money off of it, hats off to you. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next episode.